Hello everyone, my name is Marie Karekla and welcome to today's Aira Technology Talk webinar session. Before we begin today, I just want to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands of which we all meet today and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. So today's session will be on the Healthy Buildings scorecard, and some of the key topics that will be presented today do include things around international trends in IAQ, some of the challenges and opportunities, and they will present a real life cycle study around the Healthy Building scorecard that's in practice. Before we do get the session underway, if you've got any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. We will hold off until the end of the session to go through the questions, but of course, please feel free to start typing those questions in throughout the presentation. I'd now like to introduce our presenters for today. So we have Evie Sims and Scott Gregson from IAQ Ventilation. So Scott, I'll pass things over to you now and you can get this session started for us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marie, and thank you to Aira for helping us host this session. Firstly, thank you for everyone. I know we're all time's precious at this point in time, and with the rush into the end of the year, everyone's under pressure to get meet commitments, and appreciate you spending your time with us for this presentation today to learn a little bit about the Healthy Building Scorecard, how it came about, and I suppose the passion that we have for the industry and why this platform was created to give back to the indoor air quality portion of our little world. I just want to introduce myself, Scott Gregson, for those who don't know me. I have a facilities management and mechanical services contracting background. For as long as I can remember, for the last 15, 20 years, I've had a fundamental passion in the indoor environment, its health and safety, particularly in ventilation hygiene, how we do or we don't fulfill those services within the built environment. So recently I've joined forces with Evie Sims, who I'll let Evie introduce herself, but has been a bit of a founder for myself over many years in this sector. So I'll hand over to Evie to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. My name's Evie Sims. I have been in the indoor air quality restoration sector for more than 20-something years. I'm a passionate advocate for indoor health and well-being for the occupants and the building. So I sit in a lot of writing standards for the ASTM to our restoration ISCRC field. 2022, I was elected the Indoor Air Quality Association on the board of directors, so that I can continue to promote indoor air quality in its field. And I'd like to bring that to Australia. And that's why Scott and I teamed up together, so that two mad nerds can get together and talk about building an indoor air. So I'll hand this back to you.
Thanks, Evie. So the Healthy Building Scorecard, what is it and why is it? So fundamentally, across a lot of research within the industry, and obviously with recent pandemics and so on and so forth, there's been a lot of standards released, a lot of processes and a lot of recommendations about indoor air quality in a reactive sense. So for many years, Evie and I and a few of our industry peers have seen a gap in the market between what do we do on the ground as a service provider, a facilities manager, a building owner, to address indoor air quality, not just about pandemic reaction, but about health, hygiene and well-being of occupants in the built environment, and also the performance of buildings. So all of these things encompass indoor air quality. So what we've seen is that gap has created an unknown. So we have a gap where we look at practice and process, and then indoor air quality typically very quickly becomes a very science-based task to undertake. So we've seen that there's a bit of miscommunication or a bit of language that's not understood at the core coalface. So Healthy Building Scorecard is ultimately a conversation starter or a tool, an auditing tool or a rating, self-rating, self-assessment tool that any stakeholder can work their way through to understand indoor air quality's impacts across many fields. So what we saw, we obviously, IAQ awareness came to the forefront through recent pandemic, as we've discussed, and then we've seen the reaction of how do we assess IAQ? What is IAQ? Do we open a window to better create a healthier environment? Do we grab a CO2 sensor, stick in a portable air purifier? So there's a whole melting pot of reactive principles to look at indoor air quality. So we thought, okay, these buildings are typically managed by someone who's not an indoor air quality expert. All of a sudden, they're thrust up in this world. So where do they start? What do they talk about? How do they take these steps to prepare themselves? So as we've just discussed, indoor air quality stems more from a pandemic. We look at bushfires in certain bushfire-prone areas. We look at external environmental influences into a building. We look at the current building's operation of performance and ventilation. We look at personal emissions within the building. So it's not just about pandemic risk or virus transmission risk. It's about the actual indoor environment. So for us, indoor air quality is the whole environment. How does everything within the built environment, impact its quality? So ingress into the building, but then also what does the indoor environment generate itself? So ultimately, our vision is to help building managers and operators and owners start to ask the right questions. And when we say right questions, is it more about what makes up indoor air quality for you? Every building and application is very, very, very different. So indoor air quality is a very big blanket cast across an industry. And what we have, I suppose, trying to articulate is that the fundamental measures for indoor quality differ to everyone and their application. So it's about how do you understand your building and develop a pathway to improve indoor air quality that suits your application. So we've looked at a whole lot of influencing and governing bodies, and looked at research from ASHRAE, ERA, CDC, more recently IBEC, and World Health Organization to go, look, if we put all this into a matrix, where do we start? This gets very, very confusing. So how do we get some simple steps in place? So Healthy Building Scorecard helps you assess your indoor air quality goals, what's important to you, and then how do you articulate those, whether you're the service provider, the facilities manager, or a tenant within a multi-story complex. It's about how you can understand indoor air quality, how it impacts you, and how you can impact the current environment in your establishment. So our goal is to help people find a starting point, and then also set some goals and progressions for them to maybe improve to certain different levels. So obviously we've got 4 self-assessment levels within the Healthy Building Scorecard. Just to give you an overview, commendable is I suppose the entry level. It helps someone define some goals, understand what's important to them. From an indication point of view, if someone goes through the process and self-rates themselves to a commendable level, it's a great start. We understand, or you understand, have a fundamental understanding of basics of indoor air quality and ventilation. And then there's some improvement processes that you can adopt to step through the 4 stages of excellent, superior, and exceptional. If someone using the self-rating tool has a goal to reach an exceptional level, we would encourage them that they're well on their way to an international certification or recommendation level, which then obviously there's pathways that such as WELS accredited buildings and NABERS IAQ accreditation. So it's certainly not the Health Building Scorecard is a launching pad for someone to understand basics and work their way through to certain levels. So what I will do is I'll hand over to Evie. That's the fundamentals as to why we created the Healthy Building Scorecard and the gap we see in the market that this tool fulfills. Well, I'll hand over to Evie to explain the metrics behind the Healthy Building Scorecard.
Thank you, Scott. So we'd like to talk about the life cycle of air. So basically is that how we look at a building in its most simplistic form and say, okay, how can we let buildings owners and all these different levels of contractors to building owners to actually be able to start a conversation. So we've conducted evidence-based research through all the guidelines, and we've developed an 8-stage process that we can help buildings to improve the indoor air quality of their buildings. So as Scott has said, each building is very unique. There's no one size that fits all. However, there's some blanket, fundamental stuff that you have. So how do we go through that process? Again, noting that the building is this is a very fluid process. We can actually fluid and continuous. So how can we elaborate from that? So we'll start with the basics, how to define your goals. Yeah, many buildings may not have an IAQ goals. So the first step is to define that IAQ goal and the objective for your building. Keeping focus on the people that work, the health and well-being of the occupants, and also productivity. So that's the first thing, define the goal. Can we move to the second slide? Then we need to know how to measure indoor air quality. So basically is that there's a lot of different parameters. And throughout the pandemic, we're talking about CO2, we're talking about particulates and such. But these measures have always been there. It's not something that's new or such, but it is very confusing to know how do we and what do we need to do. So we want to say that, if you want to start real-time continuous monitoring in your properties, all these different parameters here could and would help you to achieve some sort of even sustainable goals or parameters in your in moving towards a higher certifications of your building. However, the basic need is that in some buildings there should be some sort of parameters that you can look at, temperature, humidity in your building, and these are really good things to know about. How do you keep your building safe during an issue that has happened and react towards it? So documenting risk and actions will help you to define that. So these continuous monitoring systems will have trend readings that will help you to gather those informations for your building. Can we move on to the next one? So now we've defined where you want to go. We've got some evidence-based statistics from the indoor environment. So where do we go from there? Of course, ventilations, we've known about that throughout the pandemics. We've heard about having good ventilation reduces the spread of contaminants. The ins and the outs. Looking at different parameters, and we'll talk a little bit more about what they are, that will reduce the odors and pollutions. And we've had cases where we might be sitting in a conference meeting, and then and sometimes you smell these really pollutants that's coming in, and the intake air from these buildings may have been in the wrong side of the building. So these will give you some sort of parameters. So improving ventilation is very important. So that's step 3. We'll move on to step 4, which is controlled humidity. and moisture. In each building, you need to do that. Right? So if you're in a basketball court, you have a tremendous amount of humidity that is brought on by the people, and the people that's playing in the field and people that's sitting there watching the field. So in a building is that your machineries can create moisture, you know, your the environment can create. So we need to know what that is, and we need to really try and reduce the humidity. I think Stephanie Spear was talking about that, the 40-60 rules to prevent and reduce contaminants in a building. That's one of the things. So how do we do that? So that's step 4. Then we've got step 5 is optimization of the HVAC system, making sure this is an important role in managing and controlling temperature, ventilation, air quality in an indoor environment. So by remote monitoring availabilities, air balancing intervals, service and maintenance intervals, and filter change, etc. So that's step 5. Step 6, clean, maintain HVAC hygiene. Fundamental and basic necessities of all buildings. However, sometimes we don't necessarily have the correct or approach to it. So how do you do this? So we'll look at that given the HVAC fans, coils, ductwork, registers, and you know, are you doing this? If not, then okay, that's fine. Then we look at process. Then we go into the step 7. You know, filters and dust and airborne contaminants. So we also know that these type of things, you know, putting a MERV 13 throughout COVID is a recommendation by a lot of scientists. However, can your HVAC, you know, is number 5 of this IAQ ventilation, this life cycle air met is my HVAC operation in its operation at its peak. Can it reduce? Can it? You know, sometimes it may not. Your HVAC system may not be able to fulfill that. Also, you know, so you need to look at. You know, you need to look at that process also. So you look at also what type of filters you'd have and what the layer approach is used. Then we go to step 8, air purification and air cleaning. All systems such as air purifiers and air scrubbers can neutralize and remove airborne contact pollutions that cannot be captured by filters such as mold, bacteria, and viruses. Even your MERV 13 filters will not be able to reduce that because they're only 99.9997. They're 3+ microns, and viruses of bacteria are 1 microns. And we know that COVID is 0.92. So, you know, so a multi-layer approach is recommended to improve indoor air quality, recommending following the basis of all these cycles. And that's why we kept on saying it's a fluid process. You start, and it's a continuous improvement. You know, you may have 1, 3, 5, 6, and don't have 8, 7, 2, 3. But if you have a scorecard, your conversation can start from there, and then everybody can actually really understand how the building is operating. And Scott will tell you a building, or is it a building, or it's a building that he's done, and where they thought that they were probably on the above level, and where it really ultimately came out on the outcome. Scott, you're good.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Evie. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a high level. Obviously, we've got a short period of time to get into something there, a topic that can typically be very, very complex and open Pandora's box. So the Healthy Building Scorecard ultimately is a self-rating matrix for someone who doesn't necessarily have a science background or a mechanical service background or a facilities management background. It could be one or a combination of all stakeholders. Basically, you have a matrix where you can sit down, assess some basic principles about ventilation and hygiene, and you may think that you are doing exceptionally well, and you go, fantastic. You might be the building owner and go, look, I've got this. So I've got the cleanest, safest building in town. I'm going to have a chat to my mechanical contractor because there might be a couple of elements in the matrix that I don't understand. And then all of a sudden, the dynamic of your assessment may change because there might be elements that you're not aware of. So hopefully the scorecard gives you that platform to have the communication in a simplistic way, not necessarily all science, not necessarily all engineering or facilities management, but a blend of both. So I'm just going to share with you a very simple, basic scorecard assessment that was done in part of the research of this process or development of this process. So it was done in Brisbane at a private school in the eastern suburbs who, they pride themselves on achieving well and above what would be perceived as a standard environment. Obviously, this was done over the COVID period. So the school did the right thing, followed obligations, reacted to advice that they had from education department and public health, assessed their risk and said, yep, fantastic. We need to provide a safe environment for students and teachers and staff. So, we'll follow the guidelines. We've got some CO2 monitors. We placed them randomly throughout classrooms that obviously given the guidelines by the manufacturers of those monitors. We got some air purifiers. We put them in highly populated and densely used environments. And we know that we have 6 monthly maintenance on our air conditioning systems because we're a relatively new school and we're only just come out of our DLP. So our maintenance is pretty good. So the verdict is that when they went through the scorecard, obviously this was after that they had reacted to a pandemic, and we approached them and said, look, would you mind helping us out and showing you how this works? The verdict was that they reacted to all this advice that they had been given, but didn't understand the fundamentals of why. Ultimately, they had a goal of providing a safe environment, but they didn't understand what the CO2 monitors were going to show them and how to react to them. They also got air purifiers. No one said to them that the air purifiers had to be of a certain size and positioned in a certain area of the room in order to work in conjunction with the existing mechanical ventilation. Ultimately, we had two systems fighting each other and not necessarily providing what should have been a better environment. And also, the air purifiers, covered in dust after a few months. No one really knew what the cleaning process was because there wasn't an inclusive conversation with facilities management staff and also cleaning staff to say, look, we've now got these new devices and this is how they need to be maintained. Through this assessment, it was fairly evident that a few of the questions needed input from a mechanical contractor. So the phone call was made to the mechanical contractor, which had a response of, hygiene practice and things outside the high wall split or the ducted unit are not AC, therefore they're not my problem. And they weren't aware of the goals that the school was setting. And the school obviously set and implemented some goals without consultation of the mechanical contractor. And obviously in that process, it became evident that maintenance had been done to a degree, but there was no documentation to say, hey, look, this is our frequency of maintenance. This is what's done across certain maintenance schedules. So yes, it was there was a contract, but there was no sort of evidence as to what had been completed except an invoice to say that maintenance had been done at this point in time. And besides the new CO2 monitors that were put in the rooms, there was no sort of evidence, even in large populated areas, no monitoring of anything but temperature and humidity. And even at that point, there was no alarm to say, look, temperature and humidity in the auditorium or the basketball or the gym had exceeded these thresholds, we need to do some actions. So what actually came about was these guys were not even on the radar of Commendable. They were working towards getting some fundamental things in place. The practice was good. However, their documentation and collaboration between key stakeholders was pretty poor. So, there needs to be some pathways developed to improve things so that things aren't missed along the way. So we're not saying that, what the outcome wasn't saying that these guys were bad. It was saying that, look, we've got we've highlighted some fundamentals that we may have overlooked, some pretty basic things that are key to our IAQ goals and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So very quick things to rectify. Obviously, it wasn't necessarily a design process about ventilation, but it was more an operational and stakeholder engagement process for these guys to get them up to speed and everyone on the same page. These guys have said, look, we don't necessarily want to go through the whole process. We just want to do better than what we've done. And now we understand that this is a collaborative pathway with everyone involved. So look, if that's all that's achieved for this environment, for those schools, for that school, the staff and the students, we think that's a fantastic thing. Obviously, the indoor air quality was thrust upon them, they're educators, and all of a sudden they had to be building biologists and occupational hygienists, and then also had a lot of input thrown at them from left, right and centre, is now they can take stock, understand what that means for their business, go about their profession of being educators, but understand how to communicate around indoor air quality with the specialist people that they need to do. So that's ultimately a very, very simple, low-level case study as to where the building scorecard could be implemented. It's like I said, that's probably the lower end of the spectrum. However, it shows the simplistic outcomes that can be found from the Healthy Building Scorecard. So look, I hope that we've covered a lot in a very short period of time. We wanted to leave a lengthy period for some questions and some comments and feedback. This Healthy Building Scorecard was only launched in September, I think it was, yes, at ARBS this year. Very, very quickly. At the moment, it's obviously you can find it on our website. It's a free self-assessment tool for industry to use. All key stakeholders are welcome to jump on, download the scorecard and utilise the metrics or the rating system as they see fit. Right now, it's early stages. It's a PDF version that you download. Obviously, you've seen some of the snippets in the presentation today. You look at what elements are important to you and pretty much do an audit, circle some ticks, work out where you excel or where you need to look at some improvements. Not only is the scorecard being utilised here in our own backyard in Australia, there's also a lot of interest from overseas in North America, where there's a lot of development uptake for something such as this platform in small to medium enterprise very quickly. So early in the new year, you will see a digitised version of the Healthy Building Scorecard come to market to make the user experience a little bit more interactive, which then will obviously stem to some recommendations around the findings that you have created for yourself and lead you on some pathways for improvement and how you can go to industry and look at making those steps. So I want to say thank you. Obviously, thank you to Evie as well for the many years of research and development that have gone into launching something like this. And as we've said, it's a fluid process. This is the first draft of getting something to market to help people. So we welcome feedback and comment and your input as to the journey as the Healthy Building Scorecard develops itself. Evie? Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. As you can see from this particular graph here, it gives you a good indication of what these processes that we were talking about would be able to see. You can see that basically in the IAQ ventilation webpage. So thank you so much. And thanks, Scott and Maria, for helping us out here.
So there is a question there that has come through from John. And John's asking, can you please explain in more detail how the placement of the air purifier location in relation to the air conditioning causes systems to fight against each other?
That is one of the biggest. I'll start first, then you can continue. One of the biggest things that I find is that air conditionings are placed behind corridors and such, especially in a classroom where the air purifier is not working at all. So I love this question. In regards to air conditioning, I'm going to let I'm going to let Scott continue to explain the competing aspect of it.
Yeah, look, fantastic. Thanks, John. In that particular scenario, the room that was utilised for that assessment had a bunch of, had multiple high wall splits plus a central ducted system. So you actually had created airflow pockets in the room, so to speak. So you had hot and cold pockets. So there was obviously a little bit of design issue within that room that impacted how the air purifier had worked, or the standalone air purifier had worked. Basically, the way it was positioned, the air purifier was shooting it. I suppose the supply air from the air conditioning system was shooting straight onto the top of the discharge from the air purifier itself. So ultimately, it was limiting its performance of expelling purified or cleaned air back into the room. So something pretty simple. Move the air purifier so that it could work better. Yes, it had a poor environment to work in to start with, but it was being impacted just purely from its positioning.
Thanks, Scott. And another one we've got here is if commendable equals compliant with standards, then the school should have been commendable as they went beyond minimum standards in many measures, example, filters.
Yep. Yeah, look, absolutely. Commendable in meeting the standards, but they weren't quite commendable in their own goals because they found some fundamentals about documentation and collaboration within themselves. So, look, yep, that high five, they were doing a great job from a standards point of view and meeting that, but their goals themselves that they set out to start with was sort of where they found their deficit. So, like I say, it's a self-rating for them, for your own benefit. So when we say commendable, that's an umbrella statement. Ultimately, these guys felt they were deficit in that goal, so therefore they felt that led to them not being commendable.
Yep, thanks, Scott. Jeffrey has written a question here as well, saying, would the scorecard account for radioactive pollution, acoustic pollution, scorecard outcomes? Does the long-term monitoring of P10 gases say using SAMBA devices recommended?
Yeah, look, I'll quickly jump in and then let Evie. Look, ultimately, the answer is yes, because you've got to understand the scorecard is it's fluid, so that you can assess if those parameters are important to you and your application, then that's setting your goals, and you set your goals before you move on to looking at what sensors you would adopt in your methodology. So the goals fundamentally set the trajectory for your use of the scorecard, and that allows you to understand how your buildings utilise and what's important to you. So hopefully I cover it, but yes is the answer, because you would establish that in your goal setting element. Evie?
Yes, I do agree. Is that the scorecard pretty much gives you a fundamental baseline. What I call at the moment, what I find is that especially during COVID time, is that we've had a lot of scientists that has given us all these really great information and based, but it's really up here, and we don't have a baseline parameters to actually walk and build that skeleton as we would be for indoor. And this one, the healthy building scorecard is literally that baseline, and it will work itself out as your building will have a way to direct itself to a IAQ point of view, and you may from that draw out a mode, a document, a pandemic document, and et cetera, as it works way itself. In regards to continuous monitorings and gases monitorings, there's a lot of different devices out there that can facilitate that. You can incorporate that into your building management program quite easily, and the scorecard will give you, as you can see at the moment, I think the scorecard has 15 different parameters in there. But if you put all the parameters in there, then it's a little bit too much, yeah.
Yeah. So ultimately, in that goal setting, if your compliance is something is mission critical to your environment, then that would be in your goal setting first stage at the end of the day, and then that would dictate how, or it would become evident across all 8 elements as to how important that is. Hopefully that answers. If there's a specific question, feel free to reach out. Yeah, if that application needs something more refined.
Brilliant. Thanks, Scott and Evie. Next one we have here from Lachlan is, how has engagement with building users and stakeholders occurred, and how have you reached them to make them aware of the scorecard?
Look, it's early days, as I say. This is probably a little bit premature for us. We were looking at doing this early next year, but demand had sort of crept up on us, and we felt that, with ARBS being a bit of a fundamental for the industry, or mechanical services industry, we thought, look, let's go to market pretty quickly and get some information out there. So engagement has been predominantly through mechanical contractors who we're aware of, and in our other business, I suppose, in our daily business, we communicate with a lot of mechanical contractors, whether they be independent man in a van organisations or right through to multinationals. And facilities managers. So we obviously supply equipment to those 2 industries, and which is what drove us to create this platform. Is they were the drivers to say, look, we're confused, help, how do we understand these things? So look, industry engagement's been great. Mechanical contractors love this because they can actually use the metrics to articulate to someone who doesn't know what they know. And also, from a science point, an occupational hygiene or an assessment point of view, it's been going quite well. So right here, right now, mechanical contractors, service providers love the tool, and it's a great conversation piece for them and facilities managers.
Yeah. So just to add up on that is that one of the good things that we know that it is a great tool is the different organizations that, apart from our local mechanical contractors that are looking at it and building, we also have international indoor air quality experts that have looked at the tool and just went, we'd like to incorporate that into into the system. So we know that the Healthy Building Scorecard is actually sound, and was we're very pleased. But it, like Scott is saying, it's still there is advantage for it to really continue to change a little bit as it grows. But the basic step is sound. It's quite sound at the moment.
Thank you. And a question here we've got from Jeff, who's asking, are there any links between the scorecard rating and levels and WELL standards?
Oh, perfect. The scorecard rating is your self-assessment. And like we've highlighted, and we've been in communication with Jack, obviously, at WELL in the past, and also at the launch, is this is a self-rating for you to understand your I suppose, position and your baseline, as Evie said. By no means would this tool be a competitor to WELL's. It's actually the first step before you go to WELL. So it's well accreditation is, and NABERS IAQ and other international certifications is certainly the pinnacle. That's the gold standard. That's where we encourage everyone. My gosh, if the whole world was in that mindset, fantastic. We'd certainly be a lot healthier and happier in indoor environments. So is it in collaboration with? No, but do we fill a gap before? Yes. So we certainly do not contradict, nor do we say use this instead of. It's certainly a pathway. So maybe for a pathway for a small to medium enterprise, right up to a medium-sized facility. If you were looking at well accreditation, please fulfill that. That's certainly the way to go.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that if you are looking for sustainable building approach, wells, green, NABERS, and all that, you'll find that the scorecard can actually be your first step to actually, before getting an assessment done, you like to do that as a self-assessment first, and then you can probably use that to really see how you can improve and then meet the criteria that each one of these different standards have. We love all these sustainable standards. That's why when we're creating it, we're looking at it going, this is what an ideal building would really be, and the people and the occupants that's in there would just love.
Yep.
Great. And another one here we've got is, as a scorecard, does it give some pathway to the assessment of external environment?
An element of it. Obviously, the core focus is the indoor environment, and we're well aware that what happens outside influences what happens inside. It's we bring a lot of these nasties into a building and then spend a lot of time and money getting nasties out of a building. In pretty basic terms. But yeah, look, absolutely, that would be something fundamental. We look at air change rates, where fresh air comes from, and those sorts of things. So, certainly external factors have a big influence on the scorecard.
Thanks, Scott. And we've got another comment in here from someone who wants to know where the scorecard can be found on the website.
Yep.
If you
want
a
healthy building scorecard at the top of the IAQ ventilation website. There's a menu bar. Healthy building scorecard is there. If you click on that, you can either, I'm not sure if you can download it straight away, or it comes to my email and I'll shoot it back to you pretty quickly.
Correct.
Like I say, baby steps at this point in time. That access will be a little bit more streamlined in the short term.
Brilliant. And another question here is, maybe for you, Evie, is in your many years of experience, what are the most common IAQ misunderstandings in buildings?
I think that the building itself is, if you have an air conditioning system, there's a building and it will just manage itself in its own entirety. So it doesn't really matter how well you manage the building. The biggest thing is that we, as individual, bring in a lot of contaminants into the building. If we have flu symptoms, we go into buildings, we will then probably have ability to cross-contaminate that space. Odors, such as perfumes and such like that, will also come into preference. So people are the biggest pathway to contaminants in a building. So it needs a little bit of tender love and care. It needs a little bit of attention. It most definitely needs ventilation. Tight buildings can be a problem. Loose buildings can be a problem. Unclean HVAC system can be a problem. And all these things were questions that we kept on being asked of. Eventually, we just thought, if we have a base, that if we can give somebody just a tick box identification chart, would that help them to understand a little bit more? And that's why the scorecard really got adopted, was that because all these was a problem and is continuously a problem. And that's why we've managed to develop this. Hopefully that makes sense.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question that's come through is, do you think the building analytics can play a role in identifying IAQ issues and tracking against the targets?
100% yes. If you have the ability to adopt and engage analytics, whether they be simple, whether they be complex analytics, obviously fit for purpose for your building and application, then yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing is that when you're doing these, when you're having sensor approach and looking at trend readings and such, is that you must understand what they mean. So the basics, this question is asked really well, is that some people just actually have the sensors. They do some sort of give out some information, but nobody really looks at it. We don't want that. That's why the scorecard looks at all these different parameters to make sure that you cover all the bases and not just one.
Brilliant. And the last question that we have that's come through is, what has been the reaction to the Health in Building scorecard since its launch in ARBS back in September?
Blown away, to be honest. We've got multinational mechanical contractors adopting scorecards as quarterly and annual audits and services for their buildings, because now they have a pathway of communication with their clients. Obviously, from the science spectrum and the science field, there's a hell of a lot of feedback and utilization saying, look, this is great. We operate at a very technical level. The scorecard actually allows us to articulate our findings and recommendations to a facilities manager or a contractor. So fundamentally, it's been fantastic, probably a little bit overwhelming as to a comment we heard from one of our colleagues overseas is, this is so simple, it paints a really good picture of things that we don't know about. And if you think about that, that's, people don't know what they don't know. So, if you're an FM and a contractor, you guys have a lot of common language, absolutely, but you guys have specialty fields as well. So it's been really good to hear the feedback that this is enabling cohesive and collaborative conversation. Evie? Sorry.
I think you've nailed it. It's been a little bit overwhelming. And that's why we would like more people to use it, so that we can actually get more feedbacks coming through. And when we make it more easier for people to use, then we can, really then be able to refine it a little bit more and add different things that we can add onto it. So we see this continuously, not growing as per se, but we'll see this continuously. We hope it will continuously be used, and we can see that moving.
Yeah, this is the Healthy Building Scorecard is not a revenue stream for our business. It is purely years and years of a peer group, not just Evie and myself. There's a lot of people behind this. We have a lot of common conversation, and we wanted to put that into a document or a matrix where it's out to the abyss for people to use as well. So it's a lot of industry knowledge and process documented is what it is for us. It's a bit of a passion, a bit nerdy, as Evie said.
Thanks, guys. Jeffrey has jumped in and asked, amongst the research example of the Brisbane East Suburban School, etc., did you find all stakeholders grasped the context of a scorecard? Did everyone appreciate the responsibility of the scorecard? Yeah, look,
yes, and that's a fundamental goal for us, right? It was there was a little bit of he said, she said when the FM or the maintenance contractor sort of broached it with the key stakeholders. But then when he was able to articulate, look, I'm meant to know all of these different things, and I'm good at mowing the lawn, I need your help. That was like I say, it's a dead simple conversation to have, but I suppose it's almost like I've got this document that is Switzerland sitting in front of us and we all need to input into it. So yeah, it was very, very quick to overcome those hurdles that usually get wound up in a whole email chain over months.
Yeah. And lastly, we've got here from Jason. He's saying, will the assessment ever form part of the National Construction Code?
Very good question. Can't answer that at this point. Would love it to, but if it doesn't form part of it, but it may spark some thought as to some little more simplistic approach and language around ventilation, then I think we've achieved our goal.
Most definitely. IAQ, indoor air quality, is still in its very infant stage in Australia. We all know about it. However, implementing it, because it's such a complicated little beast, is that to really implement it is very, very hard in per se. But we feel that hopefully if we start continuing to build something that's a little bit more simple but effective, that somebody would take it on. And we don't, like I said, we built this. It's a free of charge a scorecard that you can use, anybody can use. We didn't build it for a revenue stream. We build it for conversations data to make people be able to have conversations without going, over each other's and making things more complicated. So if this ever comes into a conversation that can spark that level to go into the NCC, then wow,
As we started the conversation, Evie highlighted that both of us sit on a lot of technical, special technical groups, both domestically and internationally, around indoor air quality and ventilation and hygiene maintenance. If this tool enables the users to provide feedback to us in those forums and statistics that we can share in those forums that influence guidelines and standards, then we've achieved something far superior to what we set out to do. And that would be the ultimate.
Brilliant. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Evie. So that does wrap up our Q&A session and does bring us to the end of today's presentation. So I'd just like to first of all start off by thanking everyone who registered and attended today's technology talk. And of course, a special thanks to you, Scott and Evie, for conducting today's presentation. The recording from today's webinar will be made available within the next couple of weeks or so, and I'll send you guys an email to let you know when that does become available for viewing. If you could also please spare a few minutes to fill out our webinar survey, that would be very much appreciated, as it does help us improve our service delivery. So I want to thank you all again. Take care, and I hope to see you at our next Aira Streamline or Technology Talk soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Marie.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.